The room smelled like rubber mats and overconfidence. That was the first thing Archer Holt noticed when he walked through the door. That particular mix of floor polish, sweat, and the kind of energy that belongs to men who have spent their whole lives being told they're the biggest thing in any room they enter. There were 12 of them already seated along the far wall, arms folded, jaws set, each one built like a freight elevator. Archer was not built like a freight elevator. Archer was built like someone who fixed other people's roofs and raised a 7-year-old daughter named Wren by himself and hadn't slept more than 6 consecutive hours in 3 years. He walked in holding Wren's hand. She had her backpack on, the one with the small embroidered fox on the front flap, and she was looking around the room with the calm, unhurried curiosity that children have when they haven't yet learned to be intimidated by things. Archer had explained it to her that morning over cereal. He said he had a job thing. She asked if she could bring her book. He said yes. She brought 2, the receptionist at the front desk, a young woman in a gray blazer, who looked like she had not been briefed on the possibility of a child arriving, blinked twice before composing herself. Name, she said. Archer Holt. She found it on her list, which seemed to surprise her. She handed him a numbered badge, 14. He clipped it to his jacket. Wren watched the badge with interest, then looked back at her book. The space was on the 31st floor of the Ashmore Group's downtown Chicago tower. Glass on 3 sides, the city spread out below like a circuit board. The room had been cleared and converted into something resembling a training facility, mats down. 2 weight stations pushed to one side. A long folding table where 3 people sat with clipboards. A woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back tight. A man in a dark suit who hadn't looked up from his phone, and a younger man with a tablet who kept tapping things. The silver-haired woman was named Constance Wiley. She ran private security operations for the Ashmore Group and had done so for 11 years. She had seen a great many things walk through her assessment doors. She had not seen a man in a canvas jacket walk through with a child in a fox backpack. She didn't react. She noted it the way she noted everything and wrote nothing down yet. The other 12 candidates did react, not all at once. It was the kind of thing that starts as a ripple. One man nudges another, someone shifts in his chair to look, a quiet exhale turns into something closer to a short laugh. The biggest man in the row, and in a row like that, the biggest man was a statement in himself, had the kind of face that arranges itself into contempt as naturally as other people smile. His name was Ridley Cross. He was 6'4", 240, former collegiate wrestling champion, currently doing contract security for a hospitality company and looking to move up. He looked at Archer the way someone looks at a wrong answer on a test. "Is this the waiting area for daycare pickup?" Ridley said, and half the row thought that was funny enough to show their teeth. Archer didn't answer. He found 2 chairs near the end of the row, set his jacket over the back of one, and sat. Wren climbed up beside him, pulled her book out, opened it to her page, and began to read. She had selected the one about sea turtles. She was very interested in sea turtles this month. "Hey," said the man 2 seats down, younger, with a thick neck and the kind of haircut that costs more than it looks. "No offense, man, but what are you doing here, like actually?" Archer looked at him. "Applying," he said, "for bodyguard work for the position listed." "Yes." The young man leaned back, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Okay." He said it the way people say okay when they mean something closer to sure, buddy. "What's your background?" "Military," Archer said. "What branch? Army? Combat? Some." The young man waited, clearly expecting more. Archer didn't offer more. The young man turned back to face the front of the room, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that said he'd filed Archer away in a category and moved on. A few seats down, someone muttered something that included the words lawn work. There was a low rumble of laughter. Wren turned a page. She'd found the part about loggerhead turtles and their navigation systems and was not paying attention to any of this. Constance Wiley was. She had not moved, had not shifted her gaze, and the man with the tablet beside her had looked up briefly at the sound of laughter, and then back down at his notes. Constance watched Archer Holt sit with his back straight and his hands in his lap, watched him not respond to the laughter, watched his daughter lean her head slightly against his arm without looking up from her book. She wrote one thing on her notepad. She circled it. The assessment started at 9. The first segment was physical. They were taken in groups of 4 to the mat area, where a trainer named Callum ran them through a standardized evaluation. Strength, endurance, reaction time. Standard enough. The first group went. Then the second. Ridley Cross went in the third group and did everything with the performance of someone who wanted to be watched doing it, which Constance had also noted. Archer was in the fourth group. He did the assessment the way he did most things, which was without fanfare. He didn't rush, didn't show off, didn't narrate his effort with grunts and exhaled force the way some of the others had. Callum called out each task and Archer moved through them. 40 push-ups, 42 pull-ups. He did 15, slow and clean. Sprints across the mat, his time was solid. Not flashy, solid. When Callum marked his sheet, he kept his expression professional. But he underlined Archer's agility score, because he had been doing this long enough to know what he was looking at. Archer Holt moved like someone who had learned to move in places where the cost of not moving well was a serious one. Wren, from her chair against the wall, had looked up for about 30 seconds during this. She watched her father do pull-ups, made a small approving face, and went back to the sea turtles. The man with the thick neck caught this and seemed to find it irritating. The second segment was scenario-based. Each candidate was given a situation, a principal under threat in a public environment, and asked to verbally walk through their response. Strategy, positioning, extraction, decision trees under pressure. The big men did reasonably well on the physical answers and rougher on the strategic ones. A few candidates were clearly drawing from training they'd gotten somewhere decent. One woman toward the end gave a response so clean that Constance made 2 marks on her sheet. Archer's scenario was a crowded hotel lobby. Active threat approaching a principal from the east. 2 exit points available, 1 compromised. Secondary threat undetermined. He talked through it for 4 minutes, clean sentences, no hedging. He addressed the unknown secondary threat not as a complication but as a variable to be positioned around. He kept 1 asset fluid until the secondary could be confirmed, then committed extraction without waiting for certainty because certainty in that window was a luxury that didn't exist. He said it exactly like that, a luxury that doesn't exist. He had the tone of someone who had not read this in a manual. The man with the tablet stopped typing partway through and just listened. When Archer finished, there was a brief quiet. Ridley Cross, who had given his scenario response mostly in declarative sentences about what he would physically do to the threat, was watching from across the room. His expression had changed by a fraction. Not enough for most people to notice. Constance noticed. They broke for 15 minutes. People stood, stretched, drifted toward the water station. Archer went back to Wren, who had finished the loggerhead chapter and moved on to leatherbacks. He sat beside her and she tilted the book slightly so he could see the page she was on. She pointed at an illustration of a leatherback crossing a beach at night. It says they come back to the exact beach where they were born, she said, even after 30 years. That's a long time to remember something, Archer said. Wren considered this with the gravity she gave to most things. I think they just know, she said. Like how I know where home is even if it's dark. Archer looked at her for a moment. He didn't say anything. He put his hand briefly on the top of her head the way parents do when words feel insufficient, and she accepted this and went back to her page. Across the room, the thick-necked man had watched this exchange. He looked away when Archer glanced up, but there was something in his expression now that hadn't been there an hour ago. Something that wasn't contempt exactly. Something that was working toward being something else. The third segment was the one nobody had expected. Constance Wiley stood and addressed the room. She explained that the final portion of the assessment would be a practical evaluation, one-on-one, controlled contact, monitored, with clear stop protocols. It was not, she said, about who could hit hardest. It was about control, composure, and the ability to neutralize a threat with the minimum force required to achieve safety. She said minimum force with an emphasis that most people in the room weren't equipped to fully understand. They were paired by rotation. Archer was the last name called. His partner was Ridley Cross. This was not an accident. Constance had arranged it. She wanted to see something, and she had learned over many years that what she wanted to see could rarely be manufactured. It had to be discovered. Ridley rolled his neck and stepped onto the mat. He was not nervous. He had never been nervous in these situations. He had a very clear model of the world in which size and aggression were the primary currencies, and so far in his life this model had proven mostly accurate. He looked at Archer Holt across the mat and saw a man who had maybe done some push-ups and had a good answer about hotel lobbies, and he adjusted his expectations accordingly. Try not to fall weird, Ridley said. He said it quietly, almost friendly. The kind of thing you say when you've decided the outcome already. Archer said nothing. He took his position. His hands were loose at his sides. His weight was slightly forward, not planted. Callum stood at the edge of the mat with his hand up, and when he brought it down, Ridley moved first. He moved fast for his size. He always did. He came in with a controlling grab, the kind of thing designed to establish dominance immediately, to lock someone into a position where your size is the deciding factor and everything else becomes irrelevant. It was a technique that had worked for him many, many times. It did not work this time. Archer's response took about 2.5 seconds. He didn't move away from the grab, he moved through it, redirecting the incoming force at the point of contact, rotating at the hip in a way that turned Ridley's momentum into a liability rather than an advantage. His right hand found the elbow, his left found the shoulder joint, and then Ridley crossed 240 pounds of former champion, went down onto the mat with a sound that was less like a fall and more like furniture. He was face down. Archer had one knee placed precisely. His hand was at the back of Ridley's shoulder in a position that communicated, without any particular drama, that further movement was going to be counterproductive. The room was quiet, not hushed. Quiet in the particular way that happens when something has occurred that no one had braced for, and the human brain requires a beat to reprocess. Callum held both hands out and said, "Stop," clear voice, and Archer rose immediately, stepped back, hands at his sides again. Ridley Cross got up from the mat. This took a moment. When he was standing, he looked at Archer with an expression that had gone through several stages in the span of about 4 seconds. Disbelief, something close to anger, and then, finally, slowly, something that could only be described as a kind of recognition. He had been in enough physical confrontations to know when he'd been handled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He didn't say anything. He gave a single nod, the way men sometimes do when words are less efficient than honesty, and walked off the mat. Constance Wiley stood. "Thank you," she said to the room. "Results will be communicated by end of day." People began gathering their things. There was a low murmur of conversation, the sound of jackets and bags, the shuffle of 12 men reassembling themselves after an hour of being taken apart and reconfigured in various ways. Most of them did not look at Archer directly. One or two did. The woman who had given the clean scenario response caught his eye briefly and gave a small nod. Archer walked back to Wren. She had finished the leatherback chapter and was somewhere in the section on green sea turtles. She looked up when he sat down. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. She studied him for a moment the way children study their parents when they're trying to understand something they don't quite have the vocabulary for. She had heard the quiet. She had heard the particular absence of sound that filled the room for those 2.5 seconds, even from her chair, even with her book open. She had looked up. "You knocked someone down," she said. It was not a question. "It's that kind of job," Archer said. Wren thought about this with her brow slightly furrowed. "Did you have to?" "Yeah," he said, "just for a second." She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her book and leaned against his arm. "Okay," she said. That was Wren. She had a gift for deciding that something was okay and then letting it be okay, which was a gift that Archer had never quite managed to develop in himself. He sat in the chair on the 31st floor with the city spread out below them and his daughter reading about green sea turtles. And he thought about the 3 years since he'd come home and tried to figure out what came after coming home. He thought about the apartment that was fine but not quite right, the school pickups, the morning routines that had taken so long to build and now ran like a machine he'd built himself from parts he'd had to identify one by one. He thought about Wren at 4, who was afraid of the dark, and Wren now at 7, who told him she knew where home was, even in the dark. He thought about what it had cost to get from one to the other, and whether any of that showed on him in ways he could see. He decided it probably did. He decided that was all right. His phone buzzed at 2:47 that afternoon. He was in the parking garage by then, Wren asleep in the back seat with her Fox backpack against the window and the sea turtle book open on her lap to a page she'd never finished. The call was from a Chicago area code he didn't recognize. He answered it. "Mr. Holt." It was Constance Wiley's voice, unhurried, direct. "I'm calling to offer you the position." Archer kept his eyes on the dashboard, outside the windshield, a parking garage pillar. The smell of exhaust and concrete. "We were impressed," Constance said, "by the full picture. Not just the mat, okay," Archer said. "Does that mean yes?" He glanced in the rearview mirror. Wren's head had tilted at some point and was now resting at an angle that looked deeply uncomfortable, and yet she was completely asleep, which was a thing that children could do, that adults had entirely lost the ability to do. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hand was still holding the corner of the sea turtle book. "It means yes," Archer said. "Good," Constance said. "Monday, 7 a.m. dress code will be forwarded. Welcome to the team, Mr. Holt." She hung up. Archer set his phone down on the center console. He sat for a moment in the concrete quiet of the parking garage. Then he exhaled, slowly, the kind of exhale that carries something with it on the way out. Some weight that had been sitting in the chest for long enough that you'd stop noticing it was there until it was gone. He started the car. In the back seat, Wren slept on, her hand on the turtle book, dreaming whatever dreams a 7-year-old dreams, when she has spent her morning watching her father be exactly who she's always understood him to be. And she's not surprised at all. Not even a little. Because she never needed to see it on a mat on the 31st floor to know it was true. She already knew. She'd always known.